We are delighted to have each of you with us this evening. My name is Paul Lambert, and I am the director of the Religion and Human Flourishing Initiative at the Wheatley Institute here at BYU. We are so pleased to host this event as part of BYU's Constitution Day events, and we are also grateful for PBS Utah for streaming this event with the support of Utah's America 250 Commission. We're thrilled to welcome our guest of honor, Dr. John Inazu, the Sally D. Danforth Distinguished Professor of Law and Religion at Washington University in St. Louis. We recognize members of the Brigham Young University administration, including Academic Vice President Justin Collings, Chief of Staff Hal Boyd, and Dean Laura Padilla Walker from the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences. And representing BYU's Constitution Day Committee, we recognize Alejandra Aldridge, Thomas Lee, and Tyson Reeder. Welcome to each of you. We also welcome and recognize Paul Edwards, a director of the Wheatley Institute. And again, we are so pleased to welcome all of you this evening for this event. And we're so pleased to welcome Dr. Inazu to BYU, his first time on campus, and we certainly look forward to his address. Following John's lecture, Judge Thomas Griffith will join John on stage for a dialogue. And following that dialogue, we'll also welcome the audience to submit questions to Dr. Inazu and Judge Griffith. The way to do that, throughout the audience and on screens, there's a flyer with a QR code, and we'd welcome you, if you have a question, to submit those questions through that QR code, and they'll be able to see those questions on stage. And of course, following the program, we welcome you to join us for a light reception in the lobby of this building. At the Wheatley Institute, as striving disciples of Jesus Christ, we are committed to engaging students, scholars, thought leaders, and the public in research-supported work that fortifies the core institutions of family, religion, and constitutional government. This week, we are pleased to celebrate the Constitution and the principles within it that offer a framework for flourishing. The troubling division we see in our society today, and most recently the deeply troubling events of last week here in Utah Valley, demonstrate the need for us to do better at engaging across difference. And as President Russell M. Nelson of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has so powerfully taught in recent years, to be peacemakers, and especially with those with whom we disagree. With this in mind, we are so grateful to have Dr. John Inazu with us this evening, a true expert and a powerful voice on pluralism and its necessary role in a thriving democracy and society. We're also pleased to have with us Judge Thomas Griffith. Judge Griffith, a longtime friend of John's, will introduce him, and I am honored to introduce Judge Griffith. Thomas B. Griffith was appointed to the United States Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit by President George W. Bush in 2005, serving in that appointment till his retirement from the bench in 2020. Judge Griffith currently serves as a member of the boards of directors of iCivics and Interfaith America, the advisory board of the Karsh Institute of Democracy at the University of Virginia, and of the Data Protection Review Court in the Department of Justice. He is also a lecturer on law at the Harvard Law School. In 2021, President Joe Biden appointed Judge Griffith to the Presidential Commission on the Supreme Court. A graduate of BYU and the University of Virginia Law School, Judge Griffith was a litigation partner for Wiley, Rain, and Fielding in Washington, D.C., prior to being named Senate Legal Counsel of the United States, the nonpartisan chief legal officer of the Senate. Prior to his appointment on the D.C. Circuit, Judge Griffith was the General Counsel of Brigham Young University. Judge Griffith is also a constitutional fellow here at the Wheatley Institute. He is a trusted voice on constitutional principles and the need for pluralism in America today. We are grateful to have Tom with us. Please join me in welcoming Judge Griffith to the podium.
Well, thank you, but this isn't about me. It's about my good friend, John Inazu. I'm so excited that he could be here today. This started with a conversation we had a number of years ago at Notre Dame when John and I were both at a conference there, and I'd long been an admirer of his and been a bit of a nuisance correspondent to him, sending him emails at the time, but finally got in the same room with him to meet with him and invited him to breakfast. And all along I was thinking, how can we get John to BYU? And so I just asked him, would you be open to an invitation? I said, I don't have the authority to do that, but would you be open to an invitation? And he said, yes, and that got the ball started. And the reason I'm excited for him to be here is I want him to meet you. I want him to meet my people. I want him to see the light in your eyes. I want him to see what's going on here at Brigham Young University. But there's another reason I want John here. I want you to hear from him. As Paul Lambert said so powerfully, John Inazu is a man of profound faith in Christ who is a peacemaker. And I hope you get the significance of the fact that the Wheatley Institute, to celebrate Constitution Day, is celebrating a person who is a peacemaker, celebrating a person who can teach us that the highest and most important purpose of the Constitution of the United States is that it teaches us how to live with people with whom we disagree. So it's my honor and privilege to introduce to you Professor John Inazu, a peacemaker.
It's such a privilege to be with you today. Thanks for being here. Thanks, Judge Griffith, for the introduction. I should also say that Notre Dame meeting, the thing that most stands out about it to me is my oldest daughter at the time, who was about 12, you pulled her over and you said, you should listen to this guy. And I thought, well, that's the greatest thing a friend can ever do for you, so thank you. And President Worthen and Senator Mrs. Smith and all of you, thanks so much for being here today. I'm looking forward to both our conversation to come and the questions from all of you. And thanks to the Wheatley Institute for hosting this, especially for, at the very last minute, finding super glues who fixed my glasses, which would otherwise have been a disaster. We are certainly in challenging and sobering times. As one friend said to me on the way here, things were very, very bad before last week, and now they have gotten much worse. So I want to suggest in these brief opening remarks, and I'll go about 20 minutes, that the challenge, and perhaps it's better to call it the responsibility, of learning to disagree is especially acute on campuses like this one and for people like all of you. This is a campus, not unlike my own, where you are blessed with more resources to pursue disagreement and understanding than almost any other time and place in human history. Universities like BYU have unprecedented access to technology and information, the material conditions for prosperity, the time and space for discussion, and smart and motivated students and faculty to have those discussions. And you have a sense of purpose that helps you do that better. In other words, if you can't figure out how to do it here, then I'm not sure where else we're going to find those places in this country. So let's jump in with the thoughts that I have about the Constitution and about learning to disagree and how we do this both legally and civically. But I want to start with some fan mail that I receive. I was recently talking with a children's book author telling me some of the beautiful letters he receives from small children whose lives have been changed by his books. Children's book authors, it turns out, hear from the best of humanity, and my world is a little different. So here are some of the responses to an essay that I wrote a few years ago in USA Today. The gist of the essay was arguing for common ground in spite of our political differences. Peter M., thank you for the hilarious rant. Academics like you walk tall in the corridors of power around the world, and you have responsibility for creating stupid government. Richard W., you are liable for spreading hate-filled, spurious material and being a tool of global oppression. You are guilty of breaking the Constitution and international criminal laws, and you will be held to account. Maureen B., your essay is nothing but self-serving BS. And all of this for a little essay that basically argued for a little more humanity in our politics. Tellingly, these and dozens of other responses I received came from both sides of the political spectrum. And I don't even get the worst of it. I have friends and colleagues whose public writings are met with racial slurs and death threats. As everyone here knows, and we've been reminded in recent days, we're living in a world where too much of our disagreement has become unhealthy and destructive. Our culture has moved from thinking that the other side is wrong to thinking that the other side is evil, creating enemies out of those who believe differently than we do. This shift to condemning our political opponents as evil hardens our hearts and amplifies our anxieties. But it's also worrisome for much more practical reasons. When you think someone is wrong, you hold open the possibility of persuasion, of convincing them of the error of their ways. When you think someone is evil, you usually just want to silence them. You can't actually simply learn how to disagree with evil. And yes, there is real evil in the world. It's evil to degrade the dignity of another human being. It's evil to exploit vulnerable people. It's evil to murder. But if we're honest with ourselves, most of us probably lump more people into the evil category than actually belong there. In a country as large and diverse as the United States, each of us, every single one of us, holds beliefs and opinions that other people think are evil. But in most cases, we can distinguish people from the ideas they hold. People themselves can be wrong, misguided, and even dangerous without being evil. I've been describing a problem with our culture that too often collapses disagreement into hate. But most of us by now are already aware of the problem. The harder question is what to do about it, how to respond. And this is where I think on this Constitution Week, we have something to learn from the law. I want to suggest that one of the key lessons to thinking about how to disagree finds its roots in the First Amendment's right of assembly. It ultimately depends on our civic commitments to that right and whether we choose to live up to those commitments, but it starts right with our Constitution. Our constitutional protections for dissent and disagreement enable the possibility of a pluralistic society where we're made up of people who believe differently on things that matter. The ebb and flow of the unsettled nature of our political system means we're not always going to count on our own team controlling the legislature, the executive, or the courts. But each of us can and should be able to count on the freedom to voice our disagreement and discontent with the decisions reached by those bodies. That's what separates a democracy from other forms of government around this world. This basic recognition of protecting dissenting expression and action is essential to living in a diverse society where different beliefs lead citizens to different thoughts on what's best for their country, its people, and its communities. And for that to mean anything, we also need to grant the same robust protections to our adversaries. Real pluralism requires political compromise and living with those whose words and actions offend our basic sensibilities, even when, and especially when, the politics are in our favor. Pluralism can't just be the last refuge of political losers. It requires give and take from all of us. That is at least the aspiration, but nothing is guaranteed. Today, support for robust expressive liberties is declining among younger generations. Recent Pew data suggests that increasing numbers of millennials and Gen Z support bans for offensive forms of speech or hate speech. And just this week, we had the Attorney General of the United States say the same. These have all been long protected under the First Amendment and with good reason from hard-fought battles learned through history. Our expressive liberties have also been weakened by the modern judicial frame of the First Amendment. The First Amendment has 5 different rights to it, individual rights: speech, press, petition, religion, and assembly. But in the past few decades, the Supreme Court's approach to free speech has swallowed all of these other rights, causing courts to awkwardly redescribe religious and other commitments as just mere speech. This ignores the non-speech dimensions of our expressive action and how we live, the silent protest, the bended knee, the march of 1 million men or women. My academic work for the last 15 years or so has focused principally on this right of assembly and what we lose by ignoring that right. It's the only right in the First Amendment that requires more than one person to be exercised. You and I can do all of the other rights on our own. We can speak by ourselves, we can petition the government alone, we can start a blog and be the press, and at least some religious faiths you can practice religion on your own. You cannot assemble alone. So the right of assembly points to the relational dimensions of our civic life. We live, work, worship, and learn, not as individuals, but as groups of people, and in those groups shape our deepest values and identities. The American founders also recognized that a core purpose of this right of assembly is to allow people to resist majoritarian understandings of the common good. From the beginning, this right was rooted in religious expression. The arrest and trial of the Quaker William Penn for unlawful assembly on the streets of London was a key factor in the debates over the right of assembly in the First Congress. As the founders knew, negotiating politics, negotiating conflicts, inevitably produces winners and losers. Those elected to office and those defeated, those who benefit from policies and those who suffer under them. But no matter who prevails in the political process, a healthy democracy must protect the groups and spaces where people can continue to pursue and express their alternative visions of the good. This commitment to assembly and civil liberties is not without limits. Under very well-established law, local authorities and law enforcement can restrict assemblies that threaten or cause imminent incitement to lawbreaking and violence. But these constraints still leave quite a bit of breathing room for our civil liberties, and this breathing room will only be secured by bipartisan and cross-ideological support for the right of peaceable assembly, no matter the politics or party. At a place like BYU, all of this might feel a bit distant, something that happens on the steps of the Supreme Court or the streets of major cities, but it's also about the ways that you choose to gather here. The clubs you form, the groups you join, even the difficult conversations you hold in classrooms and dorm rooms. Assembly doesn't always look like a protest or march. Sometimes it's the Bible study, a student newspaper, or a group of friends debating their way through a class. Even in a private religious university like this one, with unique commitments and boundaries, the practice and effort of how you come together across difference matters a great deal. How you exercise that practice here will shape the habits that you carry forward in the rest of your lives. So how do we do this, you and I? This is where the shift from knowing the importance of constitutional rights to living them out as civic practices makes those rights possible. The title of my most recent book is Learning to Disagree, and it's intended to convey an ongoing, never-finished activity. We have to keep practicing and we'll never be finished. There are no easy answers, and this book is not a checklist to better disagreement. But since this is a short talk, I'm going to leave you with a checklist. So here are 5 verbs. First, ground yourself in your convictions. You will find it's much easier to engage across deep differences when you know what you believe and why you believe it. That's true on an individual level. It's also true institutionally. When you know your purpose, what you value and why you value it, you can risk engaging and partnering with and even befriending those who see things differently. Second, respect others. There is a tendency, particularly in the world of higher education, to assert that true tolerance demands complete acceptance. You're only tolerant of me if you embrace everything I believe and pursue. That's the wrong understanding of tolerance, and it's philosophically impossible. None of us tolerates all beliefs and all ideas. Every single one of us draws lines that deem some beliefs deeply harmful or deeply immoral. But despite those lines, we can do the hard work of distinguishing people from the ideas they hold. You should respect people. You don't have to respect all ideas. Third, assume complexity, not caricature. One of the great privileges of teaching law students is that our primary texts are legal cases, and many of those cases have multiple opinions, some vigorously defending the outcomes, others fervently critiquing them. Digging into those decisions day after day and year after year is one way to remember that most of our really contested issues are hard for a reason. Hard cases and hard issues seldom come down to we're right and they're stupid. Fourth, cultivate curiosity over certainty. Because most of the issues underlying our deepest disagreements are complex, we usually have more to learn about them. That doesn't mean we walk around lacking convictions or tossing in the wind, but it should give us a degree of humility about our capacity to know and to reason. Think about confidence rather than certainty, and practice asking questions rather than making statements. Finally, engage with empathy. The easiest way to think about empathy is trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes. But tread carefully here. Like many skills and habits, empathy requires a kind of Goldilocks approach. Some people don't try hard enough to imagine another person's life. Other people over-identify and convey a false or fake solidarity. I don't know what it's like to be a black woman or an LDS missionary. You don't know what it's like to be a half-Japanese law professor. Think of empathy as proximity and imagination, not perfect understanding. So those are the 5 verbs. Ground yourself, respect others, assume complexity, cultivate curiosity, and engage with empathy. If you want to remember it, it's not just a checklist, but it spells grace. This tidy mnemonic, I know, risks sounding a little bit like self-help meets ChatGPT, but I suspect it also fits well with the spiritual anchor that undergirds this university. Grace is, after all, the unearned gift that makes reconciliation possible. And we know that all of us could use a little more grace. One thing we know in this messy world of difference is that we are going to keep hurting each other and being hurt by other people. That means we're going to need grace. We need to be humble and honest in recognizing that we're not perfect and we are inevitably going to hurt people around us. And we need to be secure enough to receive grace when it is offered to us. Most of what I've been discussing are individual postures for our own lives. These ideas relate to being a good university and a basic decency of being a human being, but they depend first and foremost on cultivating personal habits and commitments. When it comes to disagreeing better across our society, it's not going to happen without individual change. Individual commitments from you and me to listen, learn, forgive, and understand that can eventually deepen into the kinds of postures and attitudes that we need to navigate our social differences rather than annihilate the other side. We need these postures more than ever, and we're reminded of this in the light of the last few days. We need to cultivate places where teachers and students are engaged in a shared effort to learn together, places where we can have slow reading and even slower thinking. In a few years, many of you will be headed to a much faster-paced world. So let's make college a time and a place that can lower the stakes and lengthen the conversations. I think that's what most of the people in this room want. We might not always feel that way when we jump on social media or listen to political campaigns or partisan news, but I know that I experience it daily in my interactions with my students and my colleagues. I feel it in the classes that I teach and the conversations that I have as we work through the murkiness of life, engaged in a shared effort to learn from each other. I hope you too will find those places in your own lives where you can practice empathy with people who are different than you. And I hope that these small steps for each of us individually will move us forward to a different kind of politics where we can live out our commitments across deep and genuine differences and rediscover the common ground that makes so much of life possible and sometimes even beautiful. Thanks again for the invitation to join you, and I look forward to our conversation.
Well, John, I'm really glad that you brought in your interest in freedom of assembly. I first learned about you when I was on the D.C. Circuit, and I think you or somebody sent me some of your work on freedom of assembly, and I thought it was fascinating. I'd been to law school. We never talked about freedom of assembly. And I remember looking at an article of yours and thinking, this is really interesting, but I never read it. I just didn't have time to read it, and I put it in the pile to be read and resumed the dull work of the D.C. Circuit. But when your book, Confident Pluralism, came out, that was different for me. I had been involved in an ongoing discussion with Dallin Oaks, who at the time was Elder Dallin Oaks, about his concern and my concern about the nastiness that was taking place in American public life and political life, just the contemptuous way that both sides were treating each other. And when I saw your book, read the reviews, got it, read it myself, I sent it to Elder Oaks. And as you know, he read it, and he loved it. And in fact, today, you had a chance to meet with President Oaks. When he learned that you were coming to speak, he wanted to meet with you. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience with him today? Obviously not divulging anything that you shouldn't, but what was it like to meet with President Oaks, who's such an admirer of your work on confident pluralism and learning to disagree?
Sure. So I should first of all say I wish you'd read the article when you were a judge. It could have made a difference. But all is forgiven. All is forgiven, Tom. No, I'm deeply grateful for your friendship and also for the ways in which you've helped introduce my work to the LDS Church, and with President Oaks in particular. It's been deeply gratifying over the years to see him engage with some of my writing, to convey to me that it's been helpful to his own thinking. We had a great conversation, and it was fun to hear some of his own stories from legal practice and earlier in life, but then also I think his real desire to be, well, the way I put it in terms, I speak to a lot of evangelical audiences, and I talk about the importance of trying to live faithfully and neighborly in a world we don't control. And for some evangelical types who have felt they've been in control for a long time, that's a very hard message to receive. But you all are coming from a perspective where control has not been the issue historically, and in fact it's been the opposite. So to come to the same or similar kinds of principles and ideas and postures and desires from a very different starting position, and recognizing the importance, not just in our own lives, but from tradition that extends over generations, and the deep importance and value of continuing to figure out how to do it for our own sake and for the sake of the country.
Yeah. And I understand, I hope this is okay for me to say, I understand that at the end of the appointed time for your meeting with him, he asked you to stay and keep talking.
He did.
Right?
That was great.
He wanted to talk more about it. So how did you get into this world of confident pluralism? What inspired you? What did you see that you felt needed to be addressed, and why did you feel that you could do something about it?
Yeah, so I would say there are kind of two routes, one intellectual and one personal. The intellectual roots we kind of mapped out here today already, the work on the right of assembly, the theory underlying assembly that really is about, Madison called them factions, and factions were not a good thing. They were a problem that a democracy had to address. But ever since stumbling into that area of law and political theory, and realizing that this is going to be pretty key to how we figure out how to navigate our differences, because most of us exist in society as groups and as parts of institutions, not as individual silos. So that was the intellectual and legal antecedent. And then as I started to think about writing and speaking about disagreement, I realized that my own life and my life experience has been all about navigating challenging situations where what I believed wasn't necessarily the baseline. So I'll just run through a couple of those examples. First of all, as a Japanese American whose family was interned by the U.S. government during World War II, my father was born in the camps. So we've always been culturally a bit on the outside, and I've always had a suspicion of the people in power, whoever they were. It was Earl Warren and Franklin Roosevelt who made the imprisonment of Japanese Americans possible. So it doesn't really matter your politics. When you get in power, it can be very easy to start to think that you are right and invulnerable. So and that piece of family history has always shaped my engagement with these issues. And then my lived experience, I mean, I'm a Christian who teaches at a very non-Christian university. I don't have any pretenses that it'll ever be baseline to my own norms or values, but I also love it there, and I love the people there and try to engage with them, sometimes on their own terms. I spent 4 years in the military at the Pentagon, also deeply influenced by a pacifist theologian, so you can imagine those two things don't always go together well.
My guess is that Stanley.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, indeed. I had Stanley in my head as I was walking the halls of the Pentagon. And so just realizing in my own lived experiences, and of course, friendship and marriage also helps here too, right? But as you have to navigate difference and disagreement and very different ways of seeing the world, practicing this is one way to inform writing about it.
Gotcha. You know, Tim Shriver, who we both know, and we did a program with Tim and you back at the American Enterprise Institute a couple years ago, is very involved in this space with his Dignity Index. And he will tell you privately, sorry, Tim, if I'm making this public, he will tell you privately that what he's doing, the way he said it to me, he said, Tom, you're a Latter-day Saint. You all do missionary work. He said, I'm a Catholic. I don't do missionary work. I serve God. I serve Christ this way. This is the way I serve. What role, you've alluded to it, but I want you to explore a little bit more. What role is your personal faith play in the work that you're doing to embrace pluralism and make it work in our society?
Yeah, so as you were talking, I was thinking, I once had a conservative evangelical sort of approach me and critique me, and he said, I don't understand why you don't talk more about Jesus in your criminal law class. And I thought, I teach at Washington University, right? That would be, I don't know where you are, but that would be malpractice. But I do invite Christian students at WashU to my house once a month, and we do a reading group, and we talk about the intersection of learning law and faith and how you could be, essentially all of the challenges that law, both the study of law and the practice of law, is going to throw at you as someone who is trying to follow a different way, and the practices and counter liturgies that you can set up to resist those tendencies toward malformation. And I think these are the kinds of things that we can do in our own environment to recognize that we're not all going to be called to do the exact same thing or engage in the world in the exact same way, but we are called to figure out where we are, the influence we have, and how to be faithful in those moments. And then to return to the broader theme that I mentioned just a bit ago, the question of being both faithfully and neighborly in our interactions with others. I think both are imperative. You can't be unfaithful and you can't be uncharitable, and you've got to figure out a way to hold them both together.
You're probably, I know you're aware of this, that right now in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we're going through an interesting period where our prophetic leadership is telling us that our primary responsibility as a follower of Christ, our primary responsibility is that we be peacemakers, that this is how we express our faith. We don't drink coffee, okay, that's true, but we're also peacemakers. We're also peacemakers. And that's why Wheatley is doing what we're doing right now on peacemaking. That's why it's so important to have you here and teach us about it. Now, remind me when Confident Pluralism came out. Was it 2018? 2016. Was that coincidence that it came out in 2016, or just
or Providence, maybe?
Or Providence?
Yeah. Right, yeah.
Okay. And then learning to disagree was just a couple years ago.
24, so
24.
just
So
last
that's
year.
new. So we've got a couple of years of experience more on confident pluralism than learning to disagree. But if you had a chance to update them today, would you say anything different? Is the problem going away?
Yeah,
is it getting more severe? Would you update it in any way?
I mean, the good thing about having and confident pluralism in particular, having that book out for 9 years now, is it's been plenty of time to have lots of critics tell me what they think about it, and I'm still committed to the basic ideas. And usually, I mean, there are certainly things you can critique about my argument, but my usual answer at the end of the day is, tell me your alternative. Either we figure out how to live together across these deep differences that aren't going away, or we withdraw from society and hope no one finds us, or we try to win at all costs and hope we stay in control. Well, neither of those sounds very plausible in the long run, particularly when we think about how human history has unfolded. People don't keep power for that long, and the flip-flops come faster than we might otherwise think. So this idea of struggling through the really hard work of disagreeing over really hard issues and not minimizing the depth or significance of those disagreements, that seems to be where we have to be. Now, I will say, not only in the last 9 years, but in the last year, the trends, the social media trends that we all knew were going to happen are just getting worse. And the overlay of AI onto that, and realize we are just in AI 1.0. We're just at the very front end of this. So when you combine AI with social media, with the echo chambers and the partisan primes, this is not looking good. And it's going to be very hard to figure out how we even maintain the same shared understanding of reality. And I think the only way we can do it is to, as much as possible, get ourselves in front of real people and face-to-face interactions.
Let me ask you, when you were listing your 5 in the grace, and I can't remember which one this would fall, was it curiosity over certainty? Was that one, or am I blending the two?
Yeah, no, that sounds right. I mean, I'll take it as a friendly summary.
Okay. So explain that a little bit more, because certainty is a good thing, right? I need to be rooted and grounded in certain things that I'm confident about.
Here's how I think you, in that,
I just use confidence instead of, okay, yeah.
You just made my point
So
for me.
distinguish between the two. When you say be confident, certain,
I think this idea of certainty is largely a post-Enlightenment way that we have come to understand how we know the world, especially the things that matter about the world. So you and I would say that we're friends. Are we certain about that? I don't know. We've been friends so far, and I hope we stay friends. And I have a confidence in our friendship, but I wouldn't claim a certainty about that. I don't.
Thanks.
And neither would
John,
you.
I thought we were.
I am not certain that the American democratic project lasts for 50 more years. I'm hopeful and confident that it does. So I think when we think about how we engage with the world, even more so in matters of faith that are hard to prove in an epistemic or empirical sense, but what we choose to live our lives, and not just live our lives, but we make really important decisions about those commitments, decisions for ourselves and for our kids and how we spend our time and how we spend our money. So we're betting our lives on this, but to me, it's more about a confidence than a certainty about it.
Okay. You alluded to, you said you're not certain that the American Democratic Republican is going to survive for the next 50 years or something like that. John Haidt, who we all admire, said a couple years ago, he predicted a catastrophic failure of American democracy. He said, because we just don't know what happens to a democracy when you drain all trust out of the system. That's a pretty gloomy forecast. Where are you on the prediction scale? Where are we as a people now? Are we in a constitutional crisis? Are we in some other sort of crisis? And is there a way forward and a way out? Are you hopeful?
We're in a crisis for sure.
How so? From what? What's the crisis?
I'll give you one indicator of it, which we saw reinforced just last week, but there are lots of other examples. We've lost the ability to grieve and lament together. Okay. And that's kind of bone-chilling to me. We were talking last night at dinner about a common experience around 9/11. and being in Washington, D.C. and the moment, didn't matter what your politics were, it didn't matter sort of your personal day, it just, there was a sense of first grieving together, and then a sense that we are in this together. And those moments are fewer and fewer, and when we have a national event, we don't even pause to grieve or mourn. In fact, we're so quick to dehumanize those people. So think about even recent national disasters. When I got onto my social media feeds after the fires in California, it was, some of those people were saying, well, it was the progressives whose houses burned down, or the floods in North Carolina, it was the conservatives and they deserved it. And in this sense of, can we not stop and say people's lives have been destroyed and ruined first, and can we grieve as human beings and fellow citizens? And when we lose the ability to mourn together, we are in trouble as a culture. We then want to ask, well, what is it that's going to bring us to, I think the aspiration of a shared common good is probably too aspirational right now, but the question then, the pragmatic political question is, can we find common ground that we agree upon? And even that feels harder and harder to figure out. So it feels very dicey right now.
Did Justice Barrett was asked that question just a couple of weeks ago when Barry Weiss interviewed her at the Lincoln Center. And I don't know if you followed it, but Barry asked Justice Barrett, "Are we in a constitutional crisis?" And the media reporting of it was focused on her answer. She said, "No, I don't think we're in a constitutional crisis." And people ran with that. They didn't read the whole statement she made. And like Justice Ginsburg taught all of us, if you're reading a statute, the first rule is keep reading, right? Keep reading. If you read the rest of what Justice Barrett said she doesn't believe we're in a constitutional crisis now. She said, but I'll tell you the way to avert a constitutional crisis, and that is that we have to learn to listen to one another, to respect each other, and to get the contempt out of our discussion. That's the way to avert a constitutional crisis. And I like your answer and hers, because I'm concerned about some of the maximalist approaches to executive power and a suppliant Congress that doesn't seem to be doing its job. But to me, that's not the most serious problem we face. The most serious problem we face is the one that you're writing about, is that there's such contempt between and across the aisle for people that the Constitution can't survive. It can't work unless there's a willingness to listen and to accommodate and to compromise.
And I think one thing we know is we're not going to solve that problem online. In fact,
Right.
even the most optimistic people about our online interactions are realizing, even when you're able successfully to get partisans listening to the other side online, because of the algorithms, because of the way it works, you only reinforce your priors. Exactly. So there is no plausible contemporary solution to figure this out with better disagreement online. So we've got to go back to the basics.
Yeah. We have a series of questions from the audience. You ready for these?
Let's do it.
Okay, so this comes from Hiram Brimhall. When I disagree with something that a person says, what questions can I ask myself to approach that situation with understanding?
Yeah, so two things there. First of all, ideally, and in most cases, there will be some background relational context in which that disagreement is expressed. So if you are confronting a stranger for the first time and you hear something and you say, oh, I really disagree with that, probably step one is, tell me your name, right? Or let's go get coffee, or sorry, not coffee. Let's go.
Hot chocolate.
Hot chocolate. Let's grab hot chocolate. And there would be, make sure that there's at least the possibility of a relational context in which to build trust. If there is some degree of trust already, then the best follow-up is usually tell me more, without being ready to pounce on your objections. Just try to understand. And then maybe the PhD version of this is when you can get into the conversation and you can get to the point where you can explain and express the other person's position in ways that they understand and would agree with. And so you're done paraphrasing for them and they say, yes, that is what I believe and why I believe it. Then you've achieved a degree of empathy. That doesn't mean you're going to reach agreement. It just means you can start the conversation.
Yeah. That's a skill that the folks that disagree better and others teach, that when you're in a conversation, before you make your point, you have to state to the other person's satisfaction their point and say, do I understand what you're saying? And only when they say, yes, you understand what I'm saying, are you then allowed to give your point of view, which is good. Okay, this comes from Emily Blackhurst. I feel like the people in this room are more likely to seek understanding. What can we do to curb the extremism when it seems farther away? In other words, yeah, people who come to these events are interested in this. There are a lot of people who don't come to these events and don't seem to be interested in this sort of approach to things. What do you do about them?
Yeah, so I guess two things. First of all, remind yourselves of the privilege of this kind of a place. And this is where I started my remarks, but with privilege comes responsibility. So the fact that you can have events like this, the fact that you have time and classes and opportunities to think through really hard issues with really smart people, you know, it should sometimes feel like a job, because it is kind of a job for current and future citizens of this country. But then also, I think this has to be an all-hands-on-deck approach. So not just places like BYU and WashU, but every single institution of higher ed, all 4,000 of them in this country, and K-12 education, and really searching for what are the institutions left that can convene people to help them practice this sort of thing. And there just are fewer and fewer of those institutions. Not many people hang out at the public library or go to, you know, the book club anymore. So for the existing and remaining structures we have, figure out ways to empower people to work on this.
And isn't part of the answer to that we need to be very intentional about forming relationships with people who are different than us, with this goal in mind? I want to learn from you. You see the world differently than I do. I want to learn from you. And so let's go have hot chocolate. And I'm going to listen to you. And I'm not going to argue with you, but I'm just going to listen because I want to understand why you feel the way that you do.
So I think that's true, but maybe with one important caveat. It's very difficult just on a human level to start a relationship over the matter of disagreement. Right?
Yeah.
Let me go find someone who disagrees with me and let's be friends. That's very hard to pull off. So the more natural thing to do is put yourself in environments, in neighborhoods and in jobs and in sports teams or whatever it is, where you're naturally going to be with someone for some other shared common purpose, and then you realize now we've laid that common ground a bit, and now we can start to unpack what some of our differences are.
Here's a question from, where did it go? Did it disappear? Oh, this is from Maddie Wheelwright. What theologians and scholars do you lean towards to learn from? Are there any specific people you would recommend to learn from for us?
That's a great question. So I'm, well, first of all, I should say I co-authored a book with the late Presbyterian pastor Tim Keller, who was widely known in a lot of circles in this country, and I loved Tim for many reasons, but he had an ability to communicate with a clarity and a precision and a charity that I think anything by Tim is worth reading.
Do you have a favorite Tim Keller book?
Well, I get Uncommon Ground, co-authored with John
gotcha.
Inazu, I guess, right? I mean, say no more.
Do you have a second favorite?
I do actually. I like his book on marriage quite a bit. The Meaning of Marriage, The Reason for God is a good.
I like The Prodigal God. I think.
And actually, you know, he has a. I forget the title. I think it's Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering. And I read that as my dad was dying, and that was very helpful and powerful because it was not sort of a rosy, everything's going to be okay book. It was, this is why it's really, really hard, and this is why God is still good.
So Tim Keller,
so
who else?
Keller,
Who else would you recommend?
We mentioned earlier Stan Hauerwas, who's been a great influence on my life.
Tell the audience a little bit about Stan Hauerwas.
Yeah, so I mean, he was a longtime theologian at Duke, known for his very colorful language, I should say, and as a way of warning, but also a really important thinker on 20th century, particularly Protestant theology. And one of the things I admire about Stanley's work is he takes seriously the primacy of the Christian witness, not the primacy of whatever government or society we find ourselves in, and that seems to be...
Now, expand. What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, calling into question why and when we might... not that patriotism is a bad thing, but making sure that patriotism retains its proper place, not at the center of our lives, for example, as one of those. Leslie Newbegin is a important influence on on me. I mean, I like Augustine too, and so there would be a long list. We could go on and on, but those are some of the first names that come
Let me
to
pick up
mind.
on something that you said about the primacy of the Christian witness over political allegiance. And so, one of the leaders of our church, General Authority, now Emeritus General Authority, Elder Lance Wickman, once said in a meeting I was at, and he's given me permission to repeat it, that his observation, looking at our people and looking at the Latter-day Saint community, he said, too many of our people have traded their religion for their politics. In other words, their politics drive their thinking more. They spend more time watching cable, online, in political communities than they do reading scripture or prayer or temple observance or being involved in the life of their community. Is that something you see in your tradition? And is that a problem in the evangelical world today? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Oh, sure. I mean, I spent a lot of time talking with and advising pastors and different ministry leaders, and usually what I tell them is, good luck, because you've got 20, 30 minutes a week with your people, and they are spending 20 hours a week on various news sources or social media, and that is a kind of formation. And it's very difficult to counter that degree of formation. And then when that happens months and months and years over time, you start to amass habits and ways of seeing the world, and we're seeing that unfold now. So I do think, though, the in our favor is that we have a very long tradition, and we have texts that say things like love your enemies, not just when they love you, but love your enemies, full stop, and texts about the fruits of the Spirit and how we engage with charity. And most of those are not qualified commands,
Right.
like when you feel like it or when people are playing nice. And so I think we do have these resources to remind each other that, and what those resources should do is point us to the primacy of faith over politics. And when that is not happening, we need to start asking very important questions about the why.
Right. I saw that taught in a very powerful fashion a little over a year ago by President Kevin Worthen, the former president of BYU, who's with us here today. He gave a talk to a group of Latter-day Saint lawyers talking about the sermon that President Nelson had given called Peacemakers Needed. And what President Worthen did in a masterful fashion, he went through and showed that there was no language in there that had an exception for lawyers. and he did a masterful display of, so how does a lawyer become a peacemaker? But once again, that's the ordering. That's our primary commitment as followers of Christ. All the other stuff is secondary. Are you a Thomas More fan by any chance?
Oh, sure. We'll add him to the list, yeah.
Yeah, I got to answer this because the last words that he said as he's being beheaded, he said, I die the king's good servant, but God's first. And that's the order. That's the order. That our commitment to Christ needs to be. What's the language Russell Moore uses at the beginning of his podcast? Do you know? He's got this great little mantra.
I don't.
Yeah, but it ends Christ over everything. And it's got to be that perspective that we need to keep in mind.
And that also means it's not really about winning or losing in any particular contemporary or political sense. It's about being faithful and surrendering sometimes the results of that faithfulness beyond us.
Okay, last question, because I've gotten the signal that we're out of time. Are you hopeful?
Yeah, you told me you were going to ask this question.
Yeah.
First of all, and I think this will resonate, I would immediately distinguish hope from optimism. I think, in some ways, hope might be a uniquely theological virtue. So I do have utter hope in the big story and how it defines the rest of...
It's good news, right?
It is good news.
The gospel is good news. So, okay, there's that.
It's not just sort of projected news, but it's news that has already been claimed, and that should give us tremendous hope. It should make us the least anxious of the people we encounter. So I would reserve hope for in the theological sense. But where I'm optimistic, where I'm most optimistic is in spaces like this one. So I'll say I've given up a little bit on not given up, but I have less and less patience with, let's just say, the Gen Xers and above, right? And we've kind of blown it, sorry. But I do, when I talk to college students, when I talk to people just out of college, there is this deep recognition, and it's across faiths and it's across politics, where you all recognize this is not good and this is not sustainable, and we have to do something about it. Now, the caution is, and the caution, I think one of the things that we can say to you is, it's going to take institutions to do this. And so it can't just be blow everything up and start over. It's going to be the hard work of reforming the broken institutions. And if you need to build new ones, that's going to take a lot of work too. So figuring out, and this is very hard to do, it was hard for me to think about when I was in my 20s, but how do you build things now that are going to pay dividends 10 years from now? And that is, I think, the fundamental challenge for the generation of college students. But I'm very optimistic that they will rise to the challenge, that you all will rise to the challenge. And I see a lot of wisdom and desire and excitement about that. And partly it's because of looking around and seeing that the mess we're in. But I think part of it is because of a real desire to want to see things differently, in a sense that we can do things differently.
I really like, and I'll end with this, I really like your point that was in what you said, that you started thinking about this in your 20s. You started thinking about, how can I build something that lasts, that will bring about change. And so that's the challenge to all of us, all of you. It's too late for me. All of you out there, start thinking now, how can I be a peacemaker? What are the institutions I can join, that I can contribute to, where that's the goal, that's the objective, how to do it. John and Inazu, thank you very much for being with us today. We appreciate your coming here to BYU, and so ever grateful for your example and for the way you've taught us today. So please join me in thanking John.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much.